Thank you, Dr. Zung, and thank you, Oblate School of Theology, for this opportunity. I am glad to be here. This is my first time being with the Oblate community, and I hope that after today, I will be part of the community as well. So let me go ahead and put on my slide presentation so we can begin. Okay, so when I was asked to do this, the focus is on helping people get a better understanding of the Asian American experience. I thought about different titles to reflect the total experience of this group of people. At first, I came up with the title Pain and Gain, but then I thought pain is more personal, is individual, and the gain sounds permanent, but is not reflecting correctly. So the term tragedies and possibilities, I think, is a better fit. Tragedies talk about misfortunes that happen not just to the individuals, but also to the families and communities. Possibility talks about an ongoing opportunities, gains that you can attain, but also can be lost. So tragedies and possibilities are two words that I think better reflect the experience of different Asian American groups that have arrived on our shores. So that's the title. And you see, I identified as a teacher, as a learner, as a refugee, as a citizen, community member. I'm also mother, daughter, wife, sister, mentor. So that's my identity. The reason I put that is because I'm going to ask you a few questions in a poll that would let us see how we as a community today identify ourselves. So I would like to launch the first poll. And please remember that there is no right or wrong answer, and you just choose one. So the first poll is, what category do you identify most closely with? Please select one, and then we will look at the results. We have 50% completed. Let's wait a minute or more. Okay, we have 79% completed. Okay, it looks like it's not moving, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling at this point so that you can all see the result. Okay, wow, 77% of you identified as American born. A smaller percentage, 8%, naturalized citizen, and the rest have very few. Okay, so that's who we are as a community. All right, let me share the result. Okay. So that is who we are as a community in today's session. It gives us a sense of what the focus that I will have in my talk with you. So let's do the next one. Okay. All right, how do I, okay, stop share result. So I'm going to launch a second poll. The second poll is just very short because my topic is on Asian and Asian American. I like to know within this group whether you have information through experience or not. So here's the poll, very short. Select how you identify yourself. All right, so we have 5% who identified as Asian, non-Asian American. Majority of you don't fit into this category. So I'm glad to be able to share information on Asian American today. Thank you. Okay, and then last one, this one would require a little bit more thought on your part, and it asks for your thought on how you see America based on its past and present. Read through all the different choices and select the one that you identify you feel more strongly with. Okay, 79, 70, 81% voted. Okay, look like it stops at 83% people participated. Here is the result. Okay, 92% state that as a country, we continue to struggle with racial issues. Okay, a small percentage states that as a country, we will always be a racist country. And none of the other. That's very interesting. So that's good. I think a recognition that we will always struggle, it means that we have work to do, and the work is not easy, it's not short term, it's ongoing, and it requires all of our participation. So thank you. Thank you for participating in these polls. Okay. All right, let me go to the next one. Okay. So I like to share with you the sources and the references that I use for my presentation. If you have a chance, I strongly recommend that you make time to view the documentaries that put out by PBS. May was the Heritage Month for Asian Americans, and PBS put together this 5-part series of the Asian Americans experience. It's really comprehensive. It's moving because you hear the voices of the descendants of these people. And there's great information that I learned from, although I had always been fascinated and familiar with some. These documentary series really opened my eyes to a lot of new information. And then the other book that I use extensively for this presentation is a new book by Erica Lee, America for Americans. And it's American history, not just for Asian Americans, but for all the different groups that have come here. She's also the author of The Making of Asian America, another book. Then a big name in Asian American studies is Ron Takaki. He has two books that served as seminal for any studies on Asian Americans. Different Mirror, A History of Multicultural America. Again, it encompasses all the different groups, not just Asian Americans. But the one on Asian American is called Strangers from a Different Shore. And then the book that gives me a lot of comfort, hope, and inspiration is John Meacham's book. It's titled The Sword of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels. I just love that book. I have a number of quotes from that book that I would like to share with you at the end. Okay, so I like to start by sharing with you my story. Okay, I came to this country as refugees from Vietnam. For decades, Vietnam was engaged in a civil war between the North and the South. The North was communist, the South was republic, and the US was an ally of South Vietnamese government. My family came from the South, and that everybody knew about the Vietnam War, but the war didn't just stay in Vietnam. The war spread over to Laos and Cambodia. And so at the end of the period, when the collapse of the country, when the North invaded the South and made the whole country communist, tragedies and trauma also happened in Laos and Cambodia. So our history intertwined. Under the French colonial period, these three countries, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, was renamed as one country. They called us Indochina. And it talks about our position between India and China. And so when you hear the term Indo-Chinese refugees, that's what it means. People who were displaced because of the war, and they came from three countries. These are some of the images of the Indo-Chinese refugees. So here's my story. From 1960 to 75, although our country was at war, I felt that I had a pretty much happy childhood. This is a picture of my family when I was young. This was, a bit older. I had opportunity to go to school. My father would make time to take us on vacation to beautiful places. We had great schools and I learned a lot. Our country was beautiful, green rice field. But at the same time, my father was engaged in a lot of military activities. And you see this map. This is the flag of North Vietnam, stand for the communists. This was the flag of South Vietnam. Okay, so now here's a word of caution. If you do anything in research of Vietnam in the United States and you put up this flag, the Vietnamese Americans in the United States would get very angry at you, because for those who have come here to the United States as refugees, we always look at this flag as, they called it the flag of blood, because our life was turned upside down when the North invaded the South. And a lot of people, like my father's friends and colleagues, were sent to prison. Families like ours, my mother and us, would be displaced, would be evicted from our home, sent into the fields to work the fields. We would not be able to go to school. And so it created a lot of trauma. So when people see this flag, it evokes a lot of strong feelings. There was a lot of incidents in which schools had the kids do history of the family, and the kids said, my grandparents came from Vietnam. So they looked up in the encyclopedia, they drew this flag, the teachers hung up, and they had a school open house day at the school. The parents came into the room. The teachers proudly shared the artwork that the kids made. And when the parents looked at the flag, their face fell. They became stone. They couldn't say anything. They turned around and left. The teachers later asked me, "What's wrong?" I thought they would be happy that the kids were doing research on their home country. So it took a while for people to remember. For the refugees from Vietnam, that's represent the enemy. It has gotten better now because it's been 45 years since we lost our homeland, but the feeling's still strong. So while I was growing up, um, the war was going on. These are pictures that everybody identified with the war in Vietnam. Okay. This was the last picture that was taken, the last day, the New Year's Day, with my grandmother and us in our home before we suddenly left everything and became refugees. So in 75, when the communist North took over the South, my father, who had always been in the armed force, all men in Vietnam, grew up, enlisted because the whole country was at war. He also served as a diplomat. He had worked in Washington, D.C. in the 50s and represented the South Vietnamese government in Paris in the 70s, knew that if we stay behind, he would be killed, not just imprisoned, but killed because of his past. So we became refugees. This is a picture of the camp where we first attended. After 3 weeks being on the open ocean, we arrived at the Philippines, U.S. Bay in the Philippines called Subic Bay. We were put into the camp. We were there to process paperwork, and then we were sent to another camp, It was very disorienting and frightening to us because we didn't know where we were and what would happen to us. I remember that evening we were arriving at the third camp, and my father said, "Oh, today is Sunday. We need to go to Mass." So the camp was Guam, the Philippines. So he asked around and was told that, yeah, there's a priest who would do a Mass for the Filipinos workers in another camp, another tent. So we as a family trekked there, and we were in the tent, didn't know what to expect. We knew that we were there for Mass. And then the Mass began, and suddenly all of us, and I remember the feeling that it's going to be okay because we are participating in something that had felt so familiar. We felt suddenly at home in a Sunday Mass in a strange land with no knowledge of future. But that feeling stayed with me. So whenever I had a chance to travel to anywhere outside of the United States or in other states, I always make find a time to attend a Mass in a new place, and I would be feeling right at home. So one of the biggest barrier for us was language and culture. The first week of school, I remember my younger siblings were getting school lunch boxes. The family that sponsored us told us that in America, when you go to school, you have to take your lunch with you. You don't go home for lunch as you do in Vietnam. So we need to get lunch boxes. So I said, I want one too. And they looked at me and said, no, you don't need one. I said, no, but I want one. I was going into high school. They kept insisting that I didn't need one, but they didn't explain. So I said, oh, maybe we didn't have money for me. So when I got home, I told my parents. They felt sorry for me and they took me to get one. So imagine I was entering 10th grade in high school, walking down the street with this kind of lunchbox. Everybody turned around and looked at me. And I remember looking at them with their brown paper bags. And I said, oh, I feel so good. I'm so fortunate. They're so poor, they couldn't even afford a lunchbox. When I got to the school, it's a huge, big high school. I was walking down the hallway and I noticed people kept turning around, looking at me, looking at my lunchbox. And then I started to pay attention. I looked around. Nobody in that place had a lunchbox. They had brown paper bag, they had backpack. It finally dawned on me that they don't do this in high school. So the shame, the feeling of shame overcame me. I ran to the nearest trash can I could find. I threw my lunchbox in there, and that whole day and the rest of the week and rest of the month turned the whole experience into something shameful. I couldn't look up anymore. And the experience of not being able to understand one word of English made everything turn out like noise. I was bombarded with noise. I couldn't understand. In some class, the teacher tried to explain to me, and when he saw the confused look on my face, he would repeat it several times, each time louder and louder and slower, and it was still noise. So finally, the only class that I was able to understand something was French. I had attended bilingual French Vietnamese school. I was in a Catholic school and was taught by the French missionary nuns. So the teacher in my French class had an idea. She assigned as my buddy a person who was Spanish speaking student. So the teacher would be telling the student, my buddy, something in English. She turned around and explained to me in Spanish. Spanish was more comprehensible to me than English. And I would reply to her in half French, half of the words that I was picking up from her. And that's how I survived those first few weeks. Until one day in class, English class, I was shown a film. It's called Cipher in the Snow. It's an old film. And there was not a lot of language, and I couldn't really understand the language, but I understood the message exactly. It showed a school bus, a yellow school bus, driving through the snow. Suddenly, a little boy in the back of the bus stood up, and he got to the front. He said something to the bus driver. The bus driver opened up the door. He walked out. He took a few steps. He fell down into the snow, and the ambulance came. The teacher who was driving behind the bus followed the ambulance to the hospital, and he died. So the school assigned the teacher to get a group of kids to attend his funeral and to write something. The teacher interviewed other teachers in that worked with him, talked to the kids. Nobody could say anything about this child, this 12-year-old child. Nobody knew who he was. And he looked back at the boy's record and found that he had that in kindergarten, the teacher had said he was a lively boy, first grade, friendly, second grade, and then something happened in third and fourth grade, and there was no comments. He was forgotten. He was a cipher, a zero, and he died. So the teacher, in talking and finding out, his conclusion was he died from the lack of human relationship, human contact, love. And that frightened me. I said, I had been all these months not making eye contact with people, trying to hide myself behind others, not learning, not communicating. I will be like that boy. I will wither and die. When that had dawned on me, I was so frightened. I said, I don't want to die. So that day when my father came home, I told him exactly, because I had been telling him every time he asked, how was school? I said, it was fine, because I knew that he was working hard. I didn't want to burden him. So I burst into tears and said, I was not fine. And we walked back to the school. We talked to the counselor. I was put into a newcomer center where I was learning English with kids from over the world. And I found a connection there. I found that there were other kids like me. That experience stayed with me and talked about the importance of human contact, of relationships, of engaging. Another experience I had in school was when we moved to California. I was in 10th grade, no, 11th grade, and the teacher assigned us to read a chapter in this huge textbook. It's called U.S. Government. And when I brought the book home, my father said, that stuff is very important. If you don't know the stuff, you won't be able to become American citizen. So I was dying to learn. But every time I come across a word, I looked up, it didn't mean anything because I didn't have the concept. So I went back to the classroom and I asked the teacher. She gave me the dictionary. She said, look it up. I looked up and it still didn't mean anything. I went back and I went back. Finally, the teacher was so frustrated with me. She just threw the book back at my desk and said, stop asking me. So I sat there and I stood. I said, there must be a way to teach kids like me. That's another thing that transformed my life. I became a teacher of refugees and immigrant kids. And I figured out, based on my experience, how to work with kids like that. And because of the personal lived experience, I was sent to advanced study in that field. And I found out that there are theories, the approaches, the things that people need to know. And I became a trainer and teacher of teachers for exactly that reason. My father, who had been a diplomat all his life, became a custodian when he came to United States. He was one of the jobs that he got was at the Denver Natural History Museum, and he was assigned to clean 3 floors, but he wasn't able to complete his work in the allotted time, so he always came home late. One day my mother said, why don't you come home early and we'll go with you and help you? So we helped him every night without anybody knowing, until one night his supervisor happened to come back to look for something, and imagine his surprise when he saw the whole family working. My job was to use a Windex bottle and wipe off all the glass um, panels on all the displays. And he yelled at my dad, fired him, and that was the end of it. Later, when we moved to California, my parents pulled their resources together with other families and became a shop owner. This is typical of the immigrant experience, except that we lost money because people would go into the shop and would demand to take things without paying. I remember they would take, food, and when they took it to the counter, they pay us. They pulled out the money that they have from their pocket, and usually it's barely enough. And when I told them, no, this is not enough, they would yell at me and say, where do you get the money for the shop? Our government must have given it to you. So this is, good. You're taking our money anyway. And they just walked off. And so we went bankrupt. Throughout the whole thing, my father always told us, look down, don't look up. And what he meant was, don't compare ourselves with the people who are better off. He said, think of your friends back in Vietnam. Now they are homeless. They don't have a home. They can't go to school. You can still go to school. They don't have a father. Their father was imprisoned. So you are blessed. So, in a sense, he was teaching us to be grateful, to be resilient. And those are some of the lessons that stay with us all the time. So during our life in the United States, we were also getting news from Vietnam, and we knew that a lot of people were escaping the country. A lot of people were in prison. So we lived like suspended between starting life in the United States and being held back by the tragedies that was happening in our country. This was a picture of our first reunion because when we left camp, we were sponsored by USCC. USCC, the Catholic Charity, was one of the largest organizations that helped to resettle the refugees in 75. And our family was split up into 3 groups because nobody wanted to take the whole family. So that first Christmas was when my father was able to bring us back together again. And this is more recent picture. My father since has passed away, but his life lesson has always stayed with us. The other thing that I want to make sure you understand and can tell the difference is the experience of the refugees versus the immigrants. For the refugees, there's the push factors are the reasons why you had to leave your country, and the pull factors are the reasons that help you decide where to resettle. For the refugees, there's no preparation. It was a life and death matter. You usually being persecuted, and you're leaving the country is often unpredictable, sudden. You don't get to decide, and it's uncertain. As immigrant, there's a choice. People choose to leave, and there's some time to prepare, especially mentally. There's some planning. For the pull factors, if you're the refugees, um, usually depends on the nations that agree to bring you, to accept you, and international climates. When there are goodwills in the world, then more refugees are accepted than when it's not. There's policies and programs existed that allow people to resettle or reject people. So the federal, state, local support is very important. And a lot of time people would go where they are first accepted, but eventually they resettle in a place where they have families, they know that they'll get support, or the weather was not as harsh as what they're not used to. So for the immigrants, if they decide, they usually decide where to go before they left. And it's usually based on family ties, known connection, jobs, schools, opportunities. So very different between the two groups. This shows the refugee recycle. Usually it starts with some instability that happened in the home country that push people out. People flee for their lives. And then when they enter new country, usually what happened is certain group through media distorted their experience and have propaganda and say, they're invaders, we shouldn't take them. All of that leads to people electing somebody whose autocrats or, want to close the border, have strong decisions that impact other countries. When we close our borders and say we need to take care of our own, and we become very rigid, then it sort of encourages the same type of government in other countries, and then in turn creates more instability, and the cycle continues. So in the global level, the actions of our people drives the decisions of our leaders, and then it has a global impact again. Okay. So when we talk about Asian Americans, this is a large and diverse populations with multiple languages and cultures. There's certain common points, but today I will focus on the main group that made up the majority of Asian Americans. Asian American is the fastest growing race group from the last decade. This is Census 2020. The percentage of change for the Asian population is 82% versus all the other groups. Is that amazing? Currently, there's about 23 million people that identify as Asian Americans in this country. So the 6 groups that made up 85% of all Asians: Chinese, Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese. So I hope to share with you stories from all these groups. So I did Vietnamese, okay? So these are the states where where there's high concentrations of these first 6 groups. So Texas, there's a lot of Vietnamese in Texas, but the highest the group is Asian Indian. Okay. In Louisiana, Vietnamese, there's a large Catholic community in Louisiana in an area called Versailles. I had visited them many times, working with them on language development. So the first story I would like to bring to you is a boy from the Philippines. His name is Antaro Cabrera. He was from a village in the tribe of the Igorots, and he was brought to United States in 1904. He worked for an anthropologist. His name is Albert Jenks. So in 1904, there was a warfare at St. Louis. It was like a big deal for the United States at the time. The United States, through this fair, was telling the world that they had arrived. They had imperial power. They had won the war in the Pacific. They had won the Spanish War and had taken the Philippines as their own territories. So to them, it was something that they wanted to show the world. So when the United States annexed the Philippines and made it their own territory, a lot of people from the United States went to the Philippines. There were school teachers, there were military people, as well as a lot of anthropologists to study all types of people. The president at that time, President McKinley, he made a statement, it's our mission to save the little brown brothers in the Philippines. So off they went to do their mission. And at the St. Louis Fair, they had a big, large exhibit to showcase the people from the Philippines. So the anthropologist Albert Jenks was sent to the Philippines to bring back people for that village. So in the Philippine society at that time, there were different sub-society. At one end was the Visayan. They are most westernized. And then subsequently, they have the village people. And then at the bottom, they had the indigenous people. Okay. And he was to select people from these different groups and bring over. And the concept of civilized at that point was based on the concept of westernized. The more westernized you are, the higher you are on the rank of being civilized. And anthropologists at the time also used the evolutionary aspect to race. What they used to rank people was the skin color and the facial feature. And they really believed that there were races that were inherently barbaric and there were races that inherently enlightened. And they rate them accordingly. Okay. So for the people of Antaro's village, the Igorots, they were ranked as barbaric at the bottom. And the anthropologist Albert Jenks thought that this would be interesting to show the people at the World Fair. So he brought Antaro with other people from his village back to the United States. And Antaro was very excited. He heard about America. He heard about the promised land and the American dream. But when he got there, what he saw was a replica of his own village. Every day, and they even named one road, Igoroto Street. And every day when he wakes up, he was ordered with a group of people to perform. A typical day would be waking up, and they have to do dances in the morning, and then they were told to do normal things that they do at the villages. And to really attract more crowds, they were ordered to do dog eating. And people would come and look. You see this little girl here getting in here and people talking. So Antero knew that they were being looked at as savages, as objects to be displayed, and people would come and take pictures with them just like they were not real human beings. He knew that, he understood that, but he had his own ambition. He knew that this still is a land of possibility. So he had learned English and he continued to improve the language. and worked as a translator. He went home, got married, brought his wife over. His daughter was born in the United States. He saved money, he traveled, and he did all kind of jobs. He sent money back home and improved his standing in his village, and eventually was able to bring more family over. And people in his village learn about the American dream through the experience of Antaro. And that's how the American dream persisted. People endure hardships, but they don't ever talk about the hardships. They talk about the things that the possibilities that they could gain. And in the end, he was able to make a home for him and his descendant in the United States. And the story was told through his descendant, Mia Abeya. So now another descendant, Connie Young Yu, she's a descendant of the Chinese railway worker. Okay, her great grandfather was Li Wong San. He immigrated to United States in 1866. Many Chinese men came to San Francisco when they heard about the Gold Mountain. But by the time they got there, it was too late. Most of the mines had run dry, and as foreigners, they had to pay huge tax. So most of them ended up working for the railway station. Okay, a lot of men came, but they had to work for the railway station, and they were good workers. So more people were recruited. Okay? And it was hard work. It's backpacking work, but they learned to do the work and to help each other. The Continental Railroad fulfilled the America's grand ambition to expand westward. Okay, so Connie's great grandfather was a very industrious man. He learned English quickly. He became the foreman. He worked to be the liaison between the Chinese workers and the American bosses. This is the path of the railway. From the east, the Irish immigrants would lay the track. From the west, the Chinese workers would lay the track, and until they meet in the middle. Okay, so the work was very, very dangerous. The workers would go into many of these mines with the explosion powder, and they would dig up a hole in the ground or in the rock, bury the powder, and lit up the fuse and try to run out as fast as they could. Sometimes they didn't make it. So it was very, very hard. During the winter, it was the hardest because snow avalanches would come down at unexpected time, and thousands of people might die in one avalanche. So in one story, it was told that after an avalanche, 10 to 12,000 people die. And what happened is the railway company didn't do anything. They were hired as workers and they get paid as a worker. But there was no benefits. If something happened to them, if they get hurt, if they die, that's their problem. But for the Chinese people, being able to bring your body back to your homeland to bury, it's sacred. You can't leave your body on a strange land. You have to recover and bring it home. So a group called Mutual Aid Assistance, Chinese Mutual Aid Assistance Group was born. People from the same village or same town would gather and help. They would go through the avalanche, through the snow after it melt, recover the bones and identify them and send them home. In one operation, 20,000 pounds of remains, estimated of 12,000 workers, were picked up in one sweep and shipped home in boats, in ships. Okay, so after 6 brutal years, the tracks finally came together at this place in Utah. It's called Promontory Summit on May 10, 1869. The line was linked with a ceremonial called the gold spike. So they had a huge celebration. Pictures was taken, and if you notice, there's no Chinese face in any of these formal pictures. They were told not to enter the frame. They were forbidden to be part of the celebration. So 150 years later, 150 years later, this is Connie. Her great grandfather was one of the rail workers. They finally had the ceremony to acknowledge the contributions, the suffering of the rail workers. And the speaker was Elaine Chao. She was the US Secretary of Transportation. It was really beautiful that they finally was able to do that. So with the railroad now complete, the railroad workers stand at the crossroad. Should they go back to China, or should they try to carve out a future in America? So thousands of them decided to stay, and among them was Connie's great-grandfather. He had saved money working as foreman, and he was able to pull together resources with other friends and open up a store. My parents had the same experience hundreds of years later. And that's how Chinatown began. Okay, all across the United States, people pull their resources together and try to make a living among themselves. And Connie's great grandfathers was not able to become citizens. There was a law that forbade, but his he has a son who was born in California. The son is Lee Yuk-sui, and this son was able to get citizenship, and it's very important. So they were doing well until the 70s. In the 70s, there was a lot of anti sentiment against foreigners, against immigrants. Before the Civil War, the America's economy was fueled by the labor of these immigrants. After slavery is outlawed, the country is desperate for new sources of labor. So the Chinese were able to get jobs in on the farms as agricultural workers, in factories, in transportations, because they were willing to work for very low wages. They got jobs, and because they were willing to work for long and hard hours, they were preferred. And because they worked very hard to save money to go back home to get married, they were willing to do anything. So they were seen by most people as taking away people's jobs. So the sentiment against them were growing, and there was just a terrible time to be in California as a Chinese person. There was at one time people were pulled out of their home, beaten, killed. There was a massacre in California, in Los Angeles, California, where there was two gangs of Chinese had a fight, and incidentally, one white person was killed. Consequently, 500 white people lynched 20 Chinese men in the Chinatown ghetto. And after that, Congress had to do something. They passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Chinese Exclusion Act barred all Chinese laborers from enter the country. Okay, I want to show you this. The concept of building the wall to keep people out, it's old. When I found this picture, if you notice this man right here that made it over the wall, he was being helped, pulled to get over the wall. And look at his dressing. You can tell that he's more Anglo, not a person from China. And look at this poster. It says, "Notice, communists, nihilists, socialists, fan and hoodlum welcome, but no admittance to Chinaman." Okay, so Lee Yuk-sui, the son that was born in the United States. Now we go to his story. So on April 18, 1906, it was the day of the great San Francisco earthquake. Everybody were evacuated. Everybody ran out of the house. But Connie's grandfather ran back into the house and he tried to look for something. And finally, he grabbed a bunch of paper. As he was coming out, a soldier saw him and thought that he was a looter. So the soldier bayoneted him and he played dead until the soldier walked away. And then he walked to find his family. What he thought was so important that he had risked his life for was the papers that prove that he was born in the United States, that he could enter the country if whenever he went back to visit his homeland. Without those papers, he would not, be allowed to come back. After the Chinese Exclusion Act, everybody, all the Chinese men, had to carry their paper. There's a lot of people without the right paper. They were the first undocumented illegal aliens in the United States in 1882. So this is his family. Okay, this is Lee Yuk Sui family, his wife. He went back to China to marry her, so she was born in China, but all four children were born in the United States. So when they were old enough, he decided to bring his wife and children back to China for a visit. And it was very important to present your family to your parents and grandparents to formalize it. So on the way back, he died. And every ship that came into California had to go through Angel Island. It is an immigration center. Angel Island opened in 1910. And people had thought of Angel Island as the Ellis Island of the West, but Connie insisted that nothing could be further from the truth. She said that at the Ellis Island, there's this Statue of Liberty that represents immigrants being welcomed into the land. But the Angel Island, it meant exclusion. People went there to be interrogated, and it's something that people feared. So when they went back, and after the husband had died, they went to Angel Island. The children were allowed to stay on the ship to go, to another dock. Those people that the paper didn't allow them to stay would have to get off and go into an immigration building at Angel Island. This is the building. So Connie's grandmother had to leave to go there. And this is a picture. These children, they couldn't prove that they were born in the United States, so they were made to get off the ship as well. And at the Angel Island, they were interrogated. And it's not just a one-time interrogation. They asked the same question over and over with times in between to see if people would answer the same. Any deviation to them was proof of fraud, and they would be deported. So it was very stressful. So for Connie's grandmother, the immigration officer told her that, you have no status as a widow. It doesn't count. You have to be detained. So she was sent there to stay with the people for 15 months. And Connie remembered that she said that for her mother, the experience was very traumatic. When she looked at her family experience, she said the hardest part for an immigrant was being separated from their countries, for their children. She said one of the hardest punishment the government can do is to separate parents from their children. Immigrant parents left their homeland, their familiar surrounding, their loved ones, their culture, their language, all because they wanted a better future for their children. So when they're being separated intentionally, it was like having a knife put through their heart, telling them that all the sacrifices are for naught. and that the decision to leave the country was wrong, that they made the children suffered more. So it was a horrendous experience for the mother. It took her almost 2 years to be reunited with the family. 50 years later, this is Connie. This is her mother. Her mother was a child at that time. Remember, this is her mother, was a child, and now this is her mother. They took the ferry to visit Angel Island and that immigration uh, camp. And she noticed why they were there. Her mother kept looking at all the window panes. She kept looking, and Connie said, "What are you looking for?" And she said, every time, once a while, she was allowed to take the ferry to go visit her mother, which is Connie's grandmother, to visit her mother. They were separated by a barrier, but the mother always told Connie's mother that when you go down to the dock, look up, I will be standing at the window and waved at you. And so the as a child, she remembers always looking up, and she was trying to find that window where she remembers seeing her mother behind. So I want to talk to you about the legislations that had to do with the Chinese immigration. In 1790, there was a law that was passed. It was known as the 1790 Immigrant Naturalized Citizen Act. And what that law does was declare that only people who are white are eligible to become citizen. Later, it was amended to extend to people of African descent. Okay, so either white or black. You can only become naturalized citizens if you're white or black. This is what it says. The Burlingame Treaty of 1868 was when, after they realized that Chinese were such good workers and the railroad companies rely on them. Up to 90% of the railway workers were Chinese, and that if something happened to them, if they were barred from entering, the railroad would never be finished. So they had this treaty with the Chinese government to allow more people to come, and that people would be protected as workers. In return, United States would be allowed to send missionaries to China to spread the gospel and to work with the people. United States would also be eligible to send goods to China. So there was a treaty that protects and invite the Chinese from China to come. Also, during this treaty, China was listed as the most favored nation in regards to trade. So people didn't just come illegally at first. They came to look for a job, but then there was this document, this agreement, this legal document that encouraged more people to come. But after they were so successful in doing what they were invited to do, they sent money home, or they went home to bring their wife over. And so the Page Act of 1875 was passed because the government didn't want the Chinese to stay and build a family. Their thought was, you come here and work and then you go back. But now if you have wife, if you have families, you're going to stay here. We don't want you to stay here. So that's why they said, nope, no more women. Chinese women were not allowed to come. And that is very cruel because in essence, it's a way to stop people from continue to be a family. And the Page Act also created situation where now we have a lot of young men working but no families. So prostitution became an issue. And it's not just in the Chinese community, but it's pretty common. You see all these Western movies, you see all the brothel, right? But because of that, they said, oh God, these people are really bad. We need to stop bringing them over. And when the anti-Chinese went high. They passed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 82. That was supposed to be only 10 years, to last only 10 years, but they kept renewing it. In 1924, they came up with a new act, Immigration Restriction Act. It sets a national origin quota. If you are from Northern or Western European countries, no quota. If you're from Southern European Hemisphere, Southern or Eastern, there's a quota. Only certain number people could enter the country. But if you Asian, forget it. You are barred. There's not even a quota for you. So all of that from 82, that Exclusion Act applied later, not just to Chinese, but it changed Chinese to Oriental, to all Asian, until the change in 1965. It's called the Immigration and Nationality Act of 65. It changed because, remember 65 is when civil rights was happening in the United States. And a lot of people brought this up, and the United States was embarrassed by all these acts. So they had to open up a little bit, change it a little bit. They give priorities to relatives of U.S. citizens. They give priorities to refugees, and they eliminate the national origin, race, and ancestry. I have to share this with you. My husband spent 10 years studying in Germany, and he kept saying that there's a relationship between the U.S. immigration law and the Nazis legislation. And I kept thinking that he was joking until I came across this document. In it, it says that the lawyer Hans Frank, who wrote the National Socialist Handbook on Law and Legislation for the Nazi, quoted a lot of U.S. legislation on race-based citizenships law. Even in my camp, Adolf Hitler wrote this: the American Union categorically refuses the immigration of physically unhealthy elements and simply excludes the immigration of certain races. And he saw this as a model. This is astounding to me. And the term physically unhealthy elements sort of jumped across at me, because in many of the comments, the racist comments that the whites had threw toward the Chinese before the Exclusion Act happened was that, oh, these men, they were weak, they effeminate, they can't do any work. Most of them work as a cook or laundry, or, they're not real men. Well, because they passed the Page Act that eliminated all the women, so they had to do women's work, and they could be employed only in those positions. So you create conditions for people to become what you see as undesirable, and then you claim them for it. But this document to me was just horrific. So this is just a quick summary of the Chinese immigration. And as you could see, it's all ebb and flows with the condition in the United States. Okay. So now I'm going to move to the Indian American experience. Indian American also came to United States pursuing the family dream. Okay. And for the most part, many of the first group of Indians came. They're from North India, and they have lighter skin color. They have more facial features as passed for Aryan. And you have to remember that, like with all new immigrant groups, the first thing people learn when they enter this country is the hierarchical system of rights, privileges, and benefits that this country has always based on race. So the lighter skin you are, the more benefits, privileges, and rights. The darker skins you are, the less. So they learn that quickly. And in learning that, of course, they want to pass as white whenever they could. At first, they work in agricultural work. They also created a community. So the stories that we're gonna explored of these two men, Bhagat Singh Thind and Vaishno Das Bhagat. They both from North India. Bhagat Singh Thind come to the United States in 1913 for higher studies after he got his bachelor degree in India. He enlisted in the U.S. Army and he fought in the First World War. He was discharged honorably with his character designated as excellent, and then he applied and was granted citizenship in the state of Washington in 1918. But then when somebody else reviewed his paper, they rescinded that. So in 1919, he filed again for citizenship, for naturalization. Okay. And because he had claimed his race as white, a scrutiny began. His case became a case that made a huge difference in our country. It went back and forth all the way to the Supreme Court. He had paperwork that showed that he's from the region, and he had documentations. And so the Supreme Court's decisions was that, yes, you came from this region, you were able to prove that you have Aryan blood. So you are Aryan, you Caucasian, but you're not white enough. You are not white enough. That was the decision. And so because you are not white enough, you are not allowed to become a citizen. So what you have here in 1923 is a really interesting example of the Supreme Court acknowledging that race is a social contract. When they say white is not white enough, it's a subjective assessment. Okay. And when they made that decision, another first in this country was usually when you pass a law, it goes forward, it never goes backward. But in this case, it became retroactive. When the court verdict was known, a lot of Indians who previously were able to pass themselves as white, was able to pursue the dream, own a shop, land, home, all of that was gone. Following the Bhagat Singh Thind case, the government officials came to Vaishno de Bhagat's home. Vaishno de Bhagat's home decided to bring his family to United States because he believed United States, unlike India, at that time was under British colonial rule, that in United States, his children could be free. But when the Supreme Court made that decision, he was denaturalized. His citizenship was taken away, and it revoked his status as a citizen, and he was banned from owning property. He lost his house, his store. He was stripped of his identity. So he said to his family and friends, obstacles in front of me, obstacles behind me, nowhere to go. And he committed suicide. So Thind, he didn't give up. He petitioned again for the third time in 1935. And at that time, there was a new law. It's called Nelia Act, which made World War I veterans eligible for naturalizations regardless of race. Finally, he saw an opening and he applied. And he was granted citizenship. He stayed, he got married, and he pursued higher education. He earned his PhD in theology and English literature at UC Berkeley, and he delivered lectures on metaphysics. His lecture was based on 6 religious philosophy, but also included references to the scriptures of other religions. And he published and was very prolific. He led a successful life at the end. These are some of the writings that he left behind. So now we move to the Japanese immigrants. Again, like the other groups, Japanese immigrants' experience are influenced by the push and pulls of both countries, of the home country and the host country. Okay, but I want you to look at this one, Japan-Hawaii Labor Convention. Just like in the case of the Chinese immigrants, there was an act or a document, an agreement, a formal legal document that acknowledged the need for workers from Japan. There was a shortage of laborers on sugar plantation, and the king of Hawaii, the kingdom of Hawaii at that end had King Kalakaua, and he met with Emperor Meiji on one of his trips to visit the world and signed this agreement. So more Japanese came, and the Japanese were successful in their methods of farming because they used to farm in lands that was rocky, and now they have beautiful lands with hills and mountains. They were able to be very successful. They moved on to settle in California, Oregon, and Washington. And just like it happened before, once you work hard, you are successful, you reap the fruit of your labor, something happened to you. Okay. These are the farms, the work that they did. Here's one family that was able to own their own farms and box their products. So here is some of the sentiments that came when they began to be successful. People started to resent them. These people were truly, in every sense, aliens. The color of their skins, the repulsiveness of their features, the undecisive figure, the incomprehensible language, strange custom, and heathen religion conspired to set them apart. And yet, the kids were born here. They went to school. They pledged allegiance to the same flag, but the whites didn't see them as the same. David Matsumoto, okay, talked about how these laws, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, prevented people like his grandparents from land purchasing. So they had to lease land to work, and it could be taken from them anytime. And yet they were able to overcome and be successful and build a life for the family. Look at how beautiful and big this home is. And their kids were able to attend the best university. Okay, so I don't know if you heard of the term the yellow peril or yellow terror or yellow specter. In an ominous prelude to World War II, the Japanese forces surged through eastern China, and in 1932, they took over Shanghai and Nanking and committed a lot of atrocities. Japan's leaders proclaimed that just like in the United States, we said America is for American. They said Asia is for Asian. A number of countries in Asia at that time was colonized by the Western countries. So Japan wanted to push all those colonial government out. And in doing so, he wanted to claim those lands for themselves. So that was the mood. And that intensified the anti-Japanese. But it was not bad until Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor happened. This is a letter that Tokushimura, she wrote in her diary the day that she heard the attack on Pearl Harbor. This was December 7, 1941. She said, "When I came back from church today, I heard the nightmare-like news that Japanese airplanes had bombed Hawaii. I was shocked beyond belief. I sat in front of the radio and listened to the news all day. They said that at 6 a.m. Japan declared war on the United States. Our future in the United States has become gloomy. I pray that God will stay with us." Okay. So not long after, all the Japanese living in the United States were put on curfew, and then um, the executive order 9066 was signed. Okay, An, a number of areas across the United States were declared as military zones, and people who live in those areas has to be evacuated. So in that process, there were about 125,000 Japanese living in the United States in the mainland, not in Hawaii. And of those, 112,000 were forcibly removed from their home. Two-thirds were citizens. The rest could have been citizens, but they weren't allowed to. But they had lived in this country for 20 to 40 years. Even before that order was signed, President Roosevelt had commissioned two studies. And the two studies, the two reports that were submitted to him, stated very clearly that there was no threat of uprising, no threat of Japanese living in the United States would become disloyal and would, fight for the other side. None of that happened, but both were ignored. The executive order was signed. On the other hand, there were 11,000 people of German ancestry interned. German ancestry. German in United States at that time number over 7 million people, 7 million. And of that 7 million, only 11,000 were interned. Italian was also the enemy in World War II, but only 3,000 were interned. And most of them were nationals, Italians. I mean, they were not American. They were new to the country. They were there as teachers, professors, reporters, intellectuals, and there were more within those two groups, real reasons for threats. There were actually a group that was sent by the Nazi to recruit German outside of Germany to fight for their cause, but they were not treated as enemy. Okay, not until much later that the whole country did something about it. In 1976, President Ford signed a proclamation, actually removed that executive order from the government document because it had stayed all this time. And he didn't just do that on his own. Groups and generations of Japanese Americans worked to make that happen. Okay. And then President Carter signed the Commission Wartime Relocation Act for people to look into it, to study it, so that we will not repeat it. It's very interesting that everybody knows Dr. Seuss, right? He's a very mild manner and whimsical. Even him did this cartoon sort of talking about the dangers of the Japanese in the United States that they might, turn against. It shows here they being handed powder, TNT, explosion powder. So the whole country was thinking that this group will surge, will uprise against United States soon when they get the right signal from Japan. These shows the locations of the different concentration camps. So after the executive order was signed, the roundup began. Okay. This is Haro Hayashi. He didn't want to go into the camp. He didn't want to miss any school days. And his mom said, you have to stay home and pack. And he said, no, I don't want to miss school. So he made his mom write a note to send to the teacher asking for permission so that he could stay home and help pack. And so he told his mom what to write. And what she did write was, please give my son's permission to miss today because he has to help me pack. Please help him extra work because we might not be back for a while. She sat down and wrote this note for him. Okay. pictures that shows people getting ready to be transported to camps, and they had no idea where they would be going. They just told to pack. They had no idea whether they would be returning anytime. The sentiment of unknowing, being uprooted but not knowing, it's hard. So Reverend Lester Suzuki, we must evacuate our homes and churches and be taken to strange places, and we will not know what will happen to us. Ours is a strange exodus. Upon arrival, all their luggages were examined, and like a lot of children and women, and yet they were treated as criminals. The places where they were sent was stables, where they had horses and cattle. They tried to make do. So years later, the group that worked talked about the language that was used, and it was very important for us to remember that the language reflects the narratives and the perspectives. So in the executive order, they use the term exclusion, evacuation, internment. The people in the camp was internee, and before they were sent to camp, they were in a center, they call a sampling center, and they call relocation center. After the studies and debate, people said, no, we have to call these by their right name. It was not an exclusion, it was an eviction. And we were not evacuated, we were forced to move. It was forced removal. We were incarcerated, we were inmate in prisons, and we were detained. So these were detention center. It's not like assembly center, you can walk out. No, we were not allowed, and we were incarcerated. And the term incarcerated, incarceration camp, had a lot of debate because it gives America history the same image as Germany, who had incarcerated the Jewish people during the Holocaust. They didn't like that. But the beautiful thing is life continues even in camps. The natural cycles of courtship, marriage, births, and deaths continue. This is one of the gifts that a young man made to rule a young woman. This couple got married, another couple gave birth to a child, and this is the funeral of a beloved elderly person in the camp. Okay, so I want to move on to another story of the Uno family, and as told by Roberta Uno, and she's a descendant of George Uno. And I want to introduce the three new terms. Issei are the first generation Japanese who came to resettle in the United States. When they gave birth to the next generation, they're known as a Nisei, and then now we have the Sansei and so on. But each group, each generation has different experience and different reaction to things. So for the Uno family, start with Mr. Uno. His name was Takaki, but when he immigrated to United States, he wanted to be American. So he changed his name to George. He got married, and together they raised a family of 10 kids, 5 sons and 5 daughters. And he was willing to work hard, and they did well. He kept telling his children, we are American. This is our home. So the kids never really learned Japanese. They grew up hearing their parents and the elders talk, and they could understand, but they have very limited Japanese. But they have an American existence. They went out with friends. They were able to go to the best schools. They participated in Boy Scout. The eldest son, Uno, Buddy Uno, when he tried to compete to earn his Eagle Scout, he was rejected. And that was the first experience he had that sort of told him, no matter how American his family think he is, others will see him as not. and his first experience of being looked at as less than, and it made an indelible mark on his psyche. So in college, he went to Stanford. Like many of the Nisei, the parents saved money to send the kids to the best school. So he was sent to Stanford, and writing articles for the school newspaper became his outlet. He talked about his experience as a first generation Japanese in the United States. At that time, they were in the midst of depression again. You see this? Racist sentiment rised again. So when Buddy graduated from college with a degree in journalism, his dream was to work as a reporter. He went to different places to apply. He had experience, he had a good degree. None of those places accepted him because he's Japanese. He couldn't find a job as a reporter. His dream was shattered. And like many of the Nisei, these people with good education, great degree, end up working on the parents' farms or shops. At the same time, news from Japan was telling a different story. Okay, a new movement emerged, and the Japanese, the emperor at that time, tried to push the notion of Asia as a superior race. Asia will reclaim all the countries and make themselves, good. All of that. So for people as Uno being rejected on one hand, and first time he was curious about the country of his parents. He was curious and he wanted to go to find out. So he boarded a freighter to go to Japan. His intention was to find out and see if he could get a job as a war correspondent. His dream was to collect the news there to send back to the United States. He said, I was treated as a nobody in America, although I'm an American citizen. So I decided to go to Japan where my knowledge of the state would be appreciated. Okay. So when he was there, of course, the Japanese appreciate his ability to decode both cultures. They assigned him to be the liaison between the Japan Imperial Force and the Foreign Corps. And he was able to write articles that was broadcasted everywhere. Meanwhile, back home, his parents, his family was sent to prison camps. While they were interned, Howard Uno and Stanley Uno enlisted. They wanted to work for intelligence. And Ernest Uno was also enlisted for the army. At first, the Japanese in camp all tried to be on the US side to prove they're loyal. They want to be enlisted. They were not accepted. But when the war dragged on and it looks like they need more bodies, the United States allowed not just the Japanese in camps, but also the Filipino and the Chinese and the Koreans, because they needed more people. And so all three were fighting on the US side, while Buddy Uno continued to serve the Japan imperialists. At the same time, when four brothers were fighting on two sides, the father, George Uno, and the youngest son, Edison Uno, were imprisoned in maximum security. He was the first one to be rounded up and the last one to be released. He was kept in camp for years, even after the war ended and the people in internment camps were released. He was kept. His sons, they all US veterans, wrote letters, but he stayed 2 more years before he was released. So for one of the brothers, Ernest, he joined the 442 Battalion, and until now, it's still the most decorated military unit. They made up of all Japanese Americans or Japanese in America, and they did many heroic acts, was known worldwide. Um, Howard Wood as a translator for General MacArthur. The other one, Stanley, was also stationed in the Pacific. So one day, Stanley heard over the radio wave a voice that sounded like his brother. So he tuned in and he listened. It was propaganda from Japan, and he knew it was his brother. It was his brother, Buddy Uno. So the brothers in the army and in intelligence were forced to publicly denounce the brother in Japan. We wish to inform you that the Jap officer, our brother, is a traitor to American way of life. Okay, we have pledged the destruction of him and all of those like him. It was an act that they had to take, but it tore the family apart. For Buddy Uno, what people didn't understand was his experience as somebody who had ambition, who had great dream, and those dream was rejected because of who he was, because of his race. The experience of being in a place where your grandparents, your parents come from, being able to blend in, not stood out, being accepted was a thrill to him. And the sense of connection, all of that um, created bias in him. So he saw Japan and the imperial government in a different light. Had him not been rejected, I think this whole experience would be different. So it made me think of many instances in which young people in our country, minority, ethnic minority, who were rejected, Muslim young men who joined terrorist group. It's the same experience of being rejected in one place and welcome in another. At the end of the war, he was captured by the Philippine resistance force, imprisoned, but he was released. He never returned to the United States. He got married, made a home in Japan. Two of his older children survived, but the family always had this secret that they all carried. And so decades later, his granddaughter, this is the daughter of the granddaughter of this. So she kept asking questions. She wanted to know the truth. Every time she asked, nobody would talk. So she finally she lived in the United States. She went back to Japan, asked her mother, and the mother brought out this trunk. In it, they found all the documents, all the stories, and they finally was able to make peace. This is Sasuke Ina. She was born in the camp, and she said there were no marches, visual, or petition protesting. We were on our own. She was born in the camp. When they were imprisoned, her mother was pregnant with the brother, and 2 years later she was born. She asked, "Mom, why did you get pregnant in a camp, knowing the condition?" And she said, "Well, there was rumor that if we have more children, we wouldn't be separated." But that was not true. Her husband was sent to another camp, maximum security, because he had studied in Japan. So both she and her brother was born in the camp. This was a site of where her father was held. Her mother didn't know where her father was held for years. One time she went to a museum and saw in the exhibit a picture of inside the camp, and she recognized her father in one of the pictures and found out that was where he was held. So she went to visit, and while she was there, she noticed that not far from that camp was in Texas, South Texas Family Residential Center. And at that exact time, it was being used to house immigrants from South America. So she joined and organized a group of Japanese American descendants of internees. to go there and protest. Look at the posters. We already did this. And it says here, stop repeating story. And she talked, she said, my experience of being inside inform us that we cannot do this again. We have to speak up. Nobody spoke up for us. It's our turn to speak up. So I'm trying to rush through here because I have a couple more. The Korean American experience, immigration. This is a huge story in Asian American history, Asian American community, but most outsiders have never heard of it. So this happened in 1982. This is Vincent, and it was a few days before his wedding to his sweetheart, Vicky Wong. So Vincent and a group of friends went to a bar to celebrate. While he was there, two white men walk in. One was a 39, 40-year-old big man. The other one was a 20-year-old man, the stepson. The older man was a foreman at the auto worker. This happened in Detroit. And his stepson just lost his job. So the condition at the time was the American auto industry was going down. The Japanese auto industry was booming. The American auto industry didn't spend time to study the environment, the people, the needs, economy. They continued to produce all these big, huge cars that guzzle a lot of gas. So of course, people started buying smaller cars, with the crisis in the oil and all that. So a lot of people, a lot of those plants started to shut down. People lost their jobs. Resentment ran high. So what we have here was global trade that created anxiety, uncertainty, declined American auto industry. So a rise in anti-foreigner Japanese. Because workers were displaced and unemployed, there's a buildup in feeling of resentment ready to explode. So Helen Zia, she worked in one of those auto industry, and she said it felt dangerous to have an Asian face. Asian American employees of auto companies were warned not to go onto the factory floor because angry workers might hurt them if they were thought to be Japanese. So on that night, when these two guys walked in, they saw this group of young Asian men. They couldn't tell Chinese from Japanese, so they start hurling insults at this group. And so Vincent stood up and said, we're not Japanese, we're Chinese. And then the other guy said, I don't care, you all Japs, Ching, go back to your own country. And so these were kids who were born in the United States, who went through the school systems here, so of course, as young men, they start a fight. One of the younger white man, he fell down. His forehead was cut on a chair. He was bleeding. So the other man felt protected. They start punching. The fight went outside. And Vincent ran away. He was young. He was fast. He was able to run away, flee. The other two men get into the car and drive to the hospital because the other man's head was bleeding. So on the way to the hospital, they saw Vincent sitting outside a restaurant at a McDonald's restaurant. So he stopped. He pulled out the baseball bat. He whacked up to Vincent. Vincent was taken by surprise. And the older man, Ron, started to beat Vincent with this baseball bat until he couldn't move. His head was smashed. His brain was on the ground. He died a few days later on the day that he was supposed to marry his sweetheart. And that was the background. What happened was the case went to court, but the verdict was not what they expected. The judge said, the defendant attorney said, these are not men that you sent to prison. And he pleaded the case. He said, well, they had never had trouble with the law before. Ron, the older man, who killed Vincent, who murdered Vincent, is a foreman in the auto industry. He's a responsible man. He had to protect his stepson. This is normal. And so the judge agreed. He sentenced him to 100 days of probation and $3,000 in fine. He never spent a day behind jail. So the whole Chinese American community rised up. They said, this is not right. And the last word when Vincent fell down and said before he went into a coma was, it's not fair. He said to his friend who cradled his head, this is not fair. It's not fair. So it's a wake-up call for the Chinese community. They marched, they protested. The mother who lost her husband months before was devastated. The plan was that the young couple was getting a house with extra rooms so she could stay with them and they would help them with the future grandchildren. So they organized, they marched. At that time, the hate crime the civil rights did not cover Asian Americans. The civil rights law talked about you cannot discriminate people based on race, age, and all of that. The term race at that time did not cover Asian American. And so groups and groups of people had to get together and convince the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, to enlarge that definition to cover Asian American. So the U.S. government agreed to prosecute. They want, but then the case was thrown out on technicality and a retrial was ordered. The retrial was sent to another town in Cincinnati, Ohio, where there was no Asian Americans. There was no sympathy for Asian. The case lost. So they never achieved justice. The other story that I want to share with you, I think this is the last one, is about the LA riot. If you have lived in California during the 90s, you cannot escape this because for 4 days, the city burned and were looted. These were images that were on televisions 24/7. Korean merchants had to defend their own stores because the police wouldn't go in there. It was like a war zones. Many of these Korean men grew up in Korea where they had to do 1 year of military duty. It was mandate. So they knew how to use guns. They had to defend themselves. The police, in a way, felt that they were overwhelmed. So they chose to protect the West Side, which is the high-end communities with expensive homes and white Hollywood crowd. So the South Central LA, where the Korean shops are, were left to burn and defend for themselves. So a lot of people, when they looked at pictures of lootings, they said, oh, this is horrible. This is, a bad image for immigrants and all of that, which is partly true until you read this. One woman who walked out of a shoe store said, this was the first time I could get shoes for all 6 of my children at once. So it's almost like a class struggle on top of the racial struggle. So there was a lot of media that talked about how the African Americans and the Korean community had always been in conflicts. And the incident that started this was a Rodney King, the decision that the policeman who beat up Rodney King was not guilty. And that set up that. But prior to that, there was several incidents between the Korean merchants and the African Americans customers in which they clashed. One Korean merchant shot a girl in the back and she died. Before that, the African American walked into the store and stick a gun to a merchant and robbed the whole store and killed one of the people in the store. So this happened back and forth. So there was already tension. So when the Rodney King decision came out, the whole thing just exploded. And so in trying to understand what took place, a lot of papers, a lot of study was commissioned, and one of the things that caught my attention was this whole notion of middleman minority theory. And they said that when you are a minority and you are in business, you occupy a niche, a small niche, and already inherently you are going to have conflict with your clients, your competitors, your labor union. And so for the Korean immigrants, it's a story of being a merchant while being a minority. With the customers in that area, um, they native born, but they also minority. Okay, so the Korean, in order to survive, they had to price everything cheap, very low. So that, in a sense, drove out businesses that were owned by African American. They were able to do that because they came from nothing and they employ their own family. So everything that they own, um, they put back, and they only employ family. They didn't hire anybody else. To the African American community, that is discrimination. Why are you not hiring young people in our community? And when they put the profits back, they not contributing to causes in the community. It's seen as the outsiders. And there's this huge thing between cultural differences and being perceived as being disrespectful. I was part of a group that went to a huge community meetings between Korean and Korean merchants and African American customers. And when I walked into the auditorium, people were sitting apart from each other. On one side, you see Asian faces. On the other side, you see Black faces. And so the Dr. David Ramirez, the facilitator, asked people to come together. They wouldn't. And he said, turn your chairs and look at each other. If you don't want to sit together, that's okay, but turn the chair. Don't look at me. Look at each other. So they did. They got up, they moved the chair, they faced each other. So he said, okay, let's talk about what upsetting you, what you felt was wrong. So one by one, they stood up. One African American man stood up and said, you are disrespectful to our people. Whenever I go into your shop, I pay. You never put your hand out to receive the money. You always point to the counter. You make me put the money there. And when you give me back the change, you never put into my hand. You put on the counter. Are you afraid of touching us? Are you afraid of getting our blackness on you? So the Korean woman stood up and said, no, that's not the reason. I'm a woman, I'm Asian, I'm not supposed to touch you. Amen. So that's how we do it. I do it with Korean men too. And the African American said, really? You do that to other Korean men too? She said, yes. You're not disrespecting us? Say no. So a lot of those cultural differences came out. People started to smile, start to share stories. But the media up until then had played up the conflicts that came because of the economic condition. Okay, so another thing that was important to point out was, as a new immigrant, the Korean had no idea of the civil rights movement that happened 2 decades before, because they had no knowledge. There was no understanding, no appreciation of the suffering and the fights that had taken place in the African American communities. And so on the other side, the African community sees Korean as being ignorant and arrogant. The Korean came from a very monocultural and homogeneous society, and LA was the most multicultural, diverse community. And of course, these things exploded. It took time, but they rebuilt relationships, and things got improved slowly but surely. Okay. So further study pointed to these. It happened because people, same thing as in the Vincent Chin's case, people was being displaced. high rate of unemployment, and the government, both local, state, and federal, did nothing. And there's a rise in neoconservatism. People said, oh, why do we have to pay for welfare? People should stand up on their own. So lots of social programs were cut, especially in the inner city. And then there's all these issues with racial profiling, police brutality. Okay. The arrivals of new immigrants from Latin America and Asia, and they seem to be doing well, create a sense of despair and hopelessness and abandonment in African American community. So when they moved the stories to conflict between two races, they didn't have to address this. But when you dig deep down and you understand this, you cannot ignore it. Okay, I am running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I am going to move to the thing that I felt would help us the most. Yesterday's Dr. Maya talked about a framework, and that reminded me of the work that I did with schools in terms of leadership. So I want to share this with you. Every one of us need to see ourselves as a leader. What is a leader? A leader is a person who has the capacity to influence people and situation around us positively. And so in order to do that, there's three components that we need to keep in mind. The first one, I called it the moral imperative, is a conviction of knowing what's right and what isn't right, and have the courage to speak up and take action. So start with that. We have to be able to tell what's right and what's not. And in the Buddhist teaching, is part of the Eightfold Path, and it's called the right view. It's our conscience. Once we know what's right and what isn't, we have to look at people and engage with them with compassion. You can't change if you have anger, if you have hatred. With compassion, compassion in the Buddhist teaching is the right emotion. By engaging people with compassion, you figure out the right action. The right action is the ability to choose the appropriate action that move the conversation, move the situation forward, not escalating it. And one of the examples that I heard was from Bishop Barron, through the Word of Fire. And he said that when Bishop Tutu from South Africa, when he was a young priest, he was visiting a village, and it was after the rainy season. It was very muddy. He was walking on this raised wooden platform, raised wooden sidewalk, and he came to near a path, to the part on the path that was narrow. And on the opposite side, walking toward him, was this big, huge white man. And the man saw him and say, "Make way. I mean, get out of my way. I don't make way for gorillas." So Bishop Tutu got off the sidewalk, smiled broadly, and gestures with his hands and arm. "I don't either." Okay. Another story. Mother Teresa, she was walking the street. She saw this little child standing in front of a bakery, and the child closed her eyes and inhaled the aroma from the bakery that was wafting out. So she walked up to the child, held her hand, and walked into the bakery. She walked up to the front and said, "Is there a piece of bread for this child?" The man, the manager or owner, looked at them, and he looked at the line behind them, and he spat right onto Mother Teresa's face. Mother Teresa stood her ground, smiled, and said, "Thank you for that gift. Now perhaps something for the child." So Bishop Barron said, in both cases, when encountered with violence or racist behavior, we stand our ground. We react in a way that create a space, a pause to lure the person into a new space of moral and spiritual understanding. And in psychology, they talked about that when people are off balance because the other person reacted in a way that they didn't expect. When they are off balance, it has create that space for people to reconsider because they don't know what action to take. And within that sliver of time and space is when we are called to choose a better behavior. So that's why John Mitchum in his book, The Soul of America, talk a lot about that. We need to appeal to the better angels instead of the worst instinct in each one of us. So I'm sorry I went way over time and didn't have time for questions. I don't know if you're willing to stay for a couple of questions.
Sure, Dr. Nguyen-Lam. Maybe just a comment and a question to kind of land us here. So just to share, there's a couple of comments here, but to read one, just Dr. Nguyen-Lam, thank you for sharing these histories. I'm learning so much. The tragedies suffered by the various Asian groups are new to me, not taught in my years of schooling, but thank you for the resources you have shared. I have much more learning to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of a couple of comments we hear, but maybe a question to take us here to the end. The pattern of the immigration acts you outline at the start of the presentation, barring, allowing laborers, but not families, then barring when no longer deemed useful, seems to repeat itself throughout history up to the current time. The common thread seems to be the desirability of whiteness, whether termed Aryan, Anglo, or European. And the question, how do you think we can change this pattern?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I totally agree with your observation and conclusion. And as I shared in that slide of the framework, the leadership, transformative leadership, as individual, we can choose to take actions that would help people to rethink, to pause, to rethink and appeal to their better angel. And when there's enough of us doing that, we can make a difference. We have to, first of all, as people of faith, have that more imperative, that strong conviction of what's right and what's not right, and being able to act on that with compassion, but not just, any action, but the right action. And, when I heard those stories, I said, yes, that's it. So, we can take part. We can create a critical mass and that move things forward.